Welcome to
House of Whimsical Terror.
I'm Esther.
I'm Mary.
And we're coming to you today from Clyde, County Galway, in Ireland.
Yeah, and we're telling real stories of the fantastical.
All of our stories are true or told to us as true.
And today's story is...
Haunted Blood. Ooh. Yes, and it is a story by Martin Kinney, who's a great theater artist and a good friend of mine. And I'm very excited to hear this story. He's a brilliant storyteller. So.
And thank you so much for telling stories with us.
Sure, by all means. What I was going to tell was a story that my parents had also told me, but then I remembered that I had one of my own.
Oh, excellent.
Great. Okay. So this is related to my PhD research, but don't turn it off because it's not boring, I promise you. It was funny. So basically, the PhD that I'm working on is queer histories in Ireland and kind of looking at how performance can help bring back these histories from the past that people are unaware of. So when I started off my research, I was looking for just kind of a general history to see kind of what existed in terms of like being written down about queer Irish people over the last 100 years, around that. And I found a book called Terrible Queer Creatures.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, but it's a riff off W.B. Yeats' poem, which I think he uses that same phrase, terrible queer creatures or something along those lines. So basically in this book, this author, whose name I can't remember, sorry to the author, charted basically from like feudal Irish times to modern times figures who could have been gay or queer in what we would know today. But as I was going through it, it came across this figure called Edward Martin, who I was completely unaware of, but he was basically involved in the setting up of what would become the Abbey Theatre in Dublin, so the National Theatre. And he set it up alongside W.B. Yeats and Lady Gregory.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
But basically because of, he had like quite an interesting past, in that he was like of Protestant ascendancy, but he basically, I think, became Catholic. But he is from Galway, actually. So he's from a place called Tulera, which isn't too far away from here. And he basically was incredibly religious and also kept to himself a lot. So he was involved with the arts scene quite a huge amount, and he was also a massive philanthropist to the arts in Ireland, to the point that and to ecclesiastical music and stained glass windows. So kind of any church that was built maybe at the early 1900s, if it has stained glass windows, he probably had a hand in like putting those in.
Oh, interesting.
That's interesting.
Yeah. But he was just a really fascinating figure, and he was also the first president of Sinn Féin. Which is wild, yeah. So it's like, okay. So I was like, this figure that I should know about because he's involved in drama and he's involved in like so many historical movements in Ireland, I should know more about him, and so why don't I? And basically just through like looking at his history, he basically had like a very difficult past in that he believed himself perhaps to be gay, which he realised when he studied in Oxford in the UK. And he wrote loads of poetry while he was in the UK, kind of diving into Greek aesthetics and like the love of like the masculine form and all this kind of stuff. But when he came back to Ireland, it's noted that he burnt all of that poetry himself to like hide all that he had written, so like it could never be found and all this kind of stuff. So he very much like oppressed himself in that way to like not express himself. So I found him super fascinating. And I was really tempted to just like explore him a little bit more, but figure out why I was so drawn to this figure of the past and like why I was so connected. And then his name was Edward Martin Kenny. I was like, oh, a little similar name. How interesting. So basically, long story short, I put together like a 45-minute performance that was called Martin. So it was kind of about my connection to him and him to me. And in this show, I sang a lot, so I was trying to like update his history in a way that was like relevant to me. So the very first day of rehearsals, I was singing the ABBA song, "The Winner Takes It All," obviously.
Well, yes,
As you do. Because I was changing, in his history, W.B. Yeats kind of took over the history of Edward Martin, because Edward Martin died in 1923, and then anything that was said about him after that was largely said by W.B. Yeats, and they were known for like a massive rift that they had between each other. So it's kind of like, is what is in history truth, or is it based on what W.B. Yeats thought of this man?
Right.
So I was singing "The Winner Takes It All" to update it to be like, W.B. Yeats was the winner. He took it all, and blah, blah, blah. You have to put ABBA in a show. But at the end of the first day of rehearsals, I had finished up and I was like really happy with myself because I thought I had done loads. And I stood outside the theatre and I got this terrible pain in my side. And it was like when I took a deep breath, it would get worse and it would like really fill up the kind of the side of my chest. And I was like, oh wow, this is very sore. So I sat down and like took a few minutes and I was like, oh, I'm sure it's probably nothing. I won't worry about it. Obviously, very good mental health or physical health from an Irishman there for you. I'm in terrible pain. I won't check it. So I went home.
Walk it off.
Yeah, walk it off. I went home and I lay down. And it got a lot worse when I lay down. And I was like, God, I'm so uncomfortable. So I slept on it. And then the next day, the pain was still there. So my partner is a doctor. So very lucky me.
Yeah.
So I called him and I was like, hey, so I'm having this like stabbing pain and like when I lie down, it's really sore. And he was like, And I was like, should I go to a doctor? And he was like, I said, okay, good, I will. So he said, just mention you're having this like really difficult pain, kind of near your chest area, and they'll talk to you straight away. So I went to the doctor and they looked a bit concerned and they were like, okay, come into the back room. We'll hook you up to the like ECG and like check that your heart is okay and everything. So I was like, okay. So, they did all that and they said the tests were fine, but they were like, there's probably some blood work that we need to do, but we can't do that here to run certain tests. So we need to take you to, that you need to go to the hospital to get these blood tests done. And I was like, sure. Okay. So went to the hospital, went to A&E, and with the Irish health system, if you go to A&E, goodbye to the rest of your day because you're just not going to have any chance to do anything else after that. So, but I went in and 40 minutes later they saw me and I was like, that's very soon. And I noticed that they had put me into the like acute section to like to definitely be checked. So I was like, okay. So I went along with what they were saying anyway. They did a few tests and then they said, okay, we need to do a CT scan as well. So they injected me with the dye and they were like, go up for your scan. And I was like, okay. So they did a couple of tests anyway and they said, okay, we have nothing back conclusive tonight because the consultant isn't here. So we won't make you stay overnight. We don't think it's super serious. So you can go home and come back tomorrow. So I was like, okay. So I came back the next day and met the consultant, and the consultant sat me down and he said, okay, we've had a look at your scan, and basically what we think we can see is that you have a blood clot in your lung.
Jesus.
Oh my goodness.
So I was like, oh, that's very like serious.
It's quite serious.
Yeah. And then they explained that the pain I had was like fluid around the lung, so when I was lying down the fluid was traveling and stuff. So I was like, oh, okay, that's scary.
Yes.
And I remember I have always been healthy in my life up until that point. So I was kind of shocked by it. And then I was kind of like, oh, okay, this will be fine. So they put me on a medication and everything was fine and nothing came of it again. So soon after that, I went back into rehearsals and I was rehearsing and I was looking at some more of Edward Martin's history. And I looked at how Edward Martin died. And Edward Martin had a brain aneurysm. And he had survived it, but then he had surgery on it after that fact. And he died from complications of the surgery. But I thought it was interesting that the day that I had started rehearsals for this show about going back to this ghost, the ghost had come to me. Right. And he had brought the haunted blood with him. And we had a similar experience. And it was very funny because it gave me a completely new sense of this connection that we maybe had. Because I was going back to him, but I think it was a real good example of how when you go looking for something, it can find you faster than you find it.
Yes.
Truly.
So it was just really interesting. And him as a figure was just like, it was a very lonely figure. And a big part of what I was doing with the like queer history was to find a way to, because with like queer people, there tends not to be biological children or like a lineage or hereditary. So it's like, what can you inherit from the past if there's no direct line? So I'm trying to find out an answer to that. And I kind of think that that connection was him maybe saying to me in some small way, I'm still here. I'm still in the past, and what you're doing and like letting people know about me and people like me, you're on the right route. And sorry, I had to give you a blood clot for you to realize that, but you're doing something.
Here's your bonus blood clot.
But it was like, thank you for that lineage. But yeah, so I think it was a really interesting little moment of how haunting kind of was a positive thing, because it let me know that someone else was there.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's a remarkable story. Yeah. And your work is very, very important.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You know, giving voice to the voiceless is such a powerful, powerful thing. And to be able to find these people that are so discreetly hidden in the past, and then to have a connection, though that is a quite extraordinary one, but to have that connection with them to where it's almost like you're reassured that you're doing
absolutely
what you are meant to do.
And there was a part of the show, actually the last song I sang was called Apocalypse by a band called Cigarettes After Sex, which is a great name for a band.
That's a great name.
Yeah, it's a great song. And one of the lines in it was, I had just talked in the show about how Edward Martin had died, and he was really good friends with Lady Gregory. And Lady Gregory had written in her diary about the last time she had ever seen Edward Martin. So when she saw him, she said that they drove up to his house in the castle, and he was sitting in a bay window, and the headlights hit him really starkly, and he just looked very like sad and worn out. And she went in and spoke to him, and he didn't even really know who she was, but he remembered her son and like wanted to speak with her son. But her son was dead as well, and he kind of had forgotten that fact. But so in the show, what I did was I like was down on my knees with like a lamp basically straight at me to kind of mimic the headlight, and I sang this song, and one of the lines in the song is "Come out and haunt me, come out and haunt me." And when I sang those two lines, it's the only time in my entire life I've ever felt like a presence. In a weird way. And when I felt that, I felt so comforted. And as I sang the song, like had a tear like stroll down my face, because I felt something. I don't know what it was, but it was something, which was very lovely.
And on a sort of off topic, on topic, a lot of people, when they're about to die, talk about seeing people who've passed on. And if Lady Gregory was there and her son was near, he may have been seeing him on the other side, helping, you know, if he's helping his mother help her friend cross over, he may have been seeing more clearly her son from the other side than he was seeing her.
Wow.
So,
Wow. Well, that was remarkable.
Thank
As
you.
I said, a remarkable story.
yes, thank you, Martin.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Okay. You're very welcome.
And thank you to our listeners. Please come back and listen to some more stories. And until then, so long, good friends. Until we meet again, if I can remember my lines back at the house.